if you're a builder, if you enjoy creating new things and you enjoy helping people, I can't imagine a better profession.
Engineering is important because it's the foundation of our civilization.
Engineering shapes our world. It is the thing that affects every part of our living.
Modern civilization is defined by engineering, in that everything that makes it possible for us to live the lives that we do today is because people have actually invented new things.
Part of the QE Prize, the brief for the judges, was to choose an engineering achievement that has demonstrably already affected the world, affected people's lives.
I think it's difficult to identify an innovation that has had a greater impact on the world than the World Wide Web and the Internet. Here is an innovation that affects at least a third of the population of the entire planet.
The digital revolution has changed the world, transformed the world. And underlying the digital revolution, there's two key technologies: the Internet and the World Wide Web.
The Internet is the most complex engineering system ever built.
We've chosen the creation of the Internet and the World Wide Web, and 5 individuals who each have played key roles in the creation and propagation of this technology around the world.
You know, they were big thinkers. They wanted to create a system that really improved things, allowed for creativity, and each built on the next to where we went from a network to a World Wide Web over the Internet.
What's wonderful about this group is that it covers everything from the fundamental protocols, from the envisioning of the Internet, all the way through to how it's used by people.
My dream scenario would be that every time someone logs onto the web, opens a web browser and does something which gives them a bit of information or even perhaps changes their life, I want them to associate that with engineers.
Welcome to you all. Maggie Philbin, who's going to be the presenter of the day. Thank you.
Gosh, are you excited? I am so excited because in a few minutes' time we're going to meet the people who are responsible for so much of the way we go about our everyday lives. So I'm really excited to meet them. But I'm even more excited to meet you. Because what I want you to profoundly understand is that in 20 years' time, 15 years' time, 10 years' time, maybe in 5 years' time, it could be you sitting in one of these chairs telling an audience what you have done to develop a piece of technology which has changed the way we live our lives. And I want you to absolutely believe that it could be you. So while we're talking today, what I want each and every one of you is to have a think about what you would like to do to make life better, simpler, or easier. Because that's what engineering is all about. So have a think, and then at the end of this session, I'm going to ask for some ideas from you. I'm going to ask, what are you going to do? Okay? That's your job. So before we meet these wonderful special guests, I just want to do a bit of a roll call. It's really just to check that everyone's here. Okay, so I've got a list. And if you could just shout out, a bit like the school register. So, East Barnet Academy, you here? Chelsea Academy? Yes. John Roan School? Yes. Pimlico Academy? Thomas Deacon Academy? Yes. You've come from Peterborough, haven't you? Yeah, that's quite a distance. Mulberry School. St Saviour's and St Olave's. St Marylebone School. Maskell School. Okay, so is that everybody? Have I mentioned everybody? Well, I haven't. I haven't mentioned everybody because although we are here in London, thanks to the wonders of the internet, we are going to connect up with some people across the world. So first of all, let's go to Africa. Hello. Hello there. Give us a wave. Can you wave? Can you hear me? Now we've got a whole group of young people in. Oh, there they are. Whoa, let's welcome them. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of a time delay, but tell us a little bit. Tell me where you are. Tell me what it's like for you, where you live. Describe your school. Where is it?
Hi guys, my name is Niga Makakula from Misati High School. I'm doing Form 1 Blue. Misati High School is a junior and a senior secondary school found in the Lubombo region of Swaziland. The school is about 500 kilometers east from Johannesburg, South Africa. It is a mixed ability school with a total enrollment of 410 students. Behind me is a class of 2013 from One Blue. We are all excited to be here with you guys.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much for the moment. I know you're going to be listening in to everything that we're saying, and you're going to have some questions for our inventors of the internet. So we'll talk to you very soon. But now, let's go over to India. Rohit, welcome. Now, you look very lonely there, Rohit. Where is everybody else?
It's just me. Unfortunately, my school is closed for the summer, so it's just me from my room at home.
So you should be on your holidays, but you're giving up a day of the holidays to be with us. That's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about where you live.
You're breaking. I can't hear you so well. But I live in a city called Bangalore in South India. I'm in the 12th grade, 18 years old, so in high school right now. But like I said, my school is closed.
Excellent. And I guess you're as excited as we are to talk to the inventors of the internet.
Oh yes, I'm so excited to be here.
We'll talk to you in a moment. We'll find out what your question is. Let's give them a round of applause. It is just so wonderful. It's just unimaginable that we're able to do this kind of thing so very, very easily. So let's meet the people who've made this possible. I want you to give the wildest round of applause. Show your appreciation for the way that you're able to sort of update your statuses on Facebook so easily, that you're able to, shop on the internet. I want you to really show your appreciation for Louis Pouzin, Bob Kahn, and Vint Cerf. Come to the stage. You are their heroes. You are rock stars to everybody in the audience, and I am so excited to be sitting here and meeting you. And the first thing I'd really like us to work out is who did what. Okay, who did the most? We all want to know who worked the hardest, don't we? Okay, so just
this
explain.
is a collaborative effort. Everybody put something into the system, and that's why it's such a cool deal, because everybody got to contribute.
Okay.
Not only the three of us here, but lots of people around the world.
Yeah. Yes, sadly, Tim can't be with us this morning. But perhaps just take it in turn. Just explain a little bit about the chronology and the roles that you had.
I think you should start, Bob, with 1968-69. Then we'll get to Louis.
Well, my own role in networking started out in the mid-1960s when I just got interested in computer networking. I had been on the faculty at MIT at the time, and I was an applied mathematician, really working in communications. Vint, who I did know at the time, was coming up through the computer science side of the world, and I took a leave of absence to get some practical experience, because in order to succeed at a place like MIT, it wasn't enough to be smart. There were a lot of smart people and very limited room on the faculty. And so it was made very clear to me that the secret to success was doing something that would make a difference in the world. And solving equations didn't necessarily fit the bill.
I think they can all appreciate that point of view.
Anybody who doesn't understand that? Okay, so what I did was took a leave of absence and started to work on computer networking and trying to figure out how to make computers work together and the like. And at the time, people thought I was throwing my career away. But I proceeded on with it, and little by little, it became something more interesting. Vint and I got together for the first time in actually testing this network that we built. It was called ARPANET. It was the very first computer network. He was a student at UCLA at the time, and I was at Bolt, Beranek & Newman, the company that had built it. And so we ended up having a good collaboration then, and that's a collaboration that's lasted for the last 43, 44 years.
That's right, long time.
And Louis, of course, had sort of independently been working on an effort in networking in France, and we're still trying to figure out when we first actually got together, but it was sometime in the early 1970s. And Louis had some very interesting ideas that he was pursuing on networks that he can talk more about, but the collaboration between myself and Vint led to many, many years of working together on trying to figure out how to make networks together, how to create what became the internet by virtue of developing protocols and funding people to actually do implementations. And interestingly enough, one of the very first decisions that we made was to do it in an international context, so that we actually had participants from Europe that were part of those early discussions. Initially, with the UK, that was our first collaboration, but eventually through satellite linking, we got into Germany and Italy and Norway, and where else did we get into?
The UK.
Well, plus the UK. So that was really a very exciting time. We saw it purely as an interesting research challenge. And people often ask us, could we foresee what the future would bring? And early on when I was asked those questions, I was very serious about it and said, well, of course not. It was just a research experiment. We're trying to figure. But after about the 10th question, I said, well, of course we could see it all very clearly.
Yes, in fact, in 5 minutes' time, the next thing will be happening, right?
Well, in 10 years, we'll invent the personal computer, and in 20 years, everything will be opened up. But you know, and the reality was unveiled to us little by little. Vint has his own perspective on that because he's been a party to it right from the beginning, but and Louis as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, and how do you see the...
Well, actually, I think Louis should talk about this because you were concurrent with a lot of this.
You have the sound, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there in this room anyone who has two hands and who has not used and who is not using the internet?
So they're all using the internet.
All right. So the answer is they all use internet. Okay. But now internet, you know, when I started at least to get involved into internet, it was 1971. And the way it was working at the time.
Oh, they don't have your slides up yet. Can we get
slides, please? All right.
There we are. Ta-da!
So that's me, you know, supposedly. I was using a teletype initially, writing programs. There was not email at the time, you know. We were just connected to a central computer with telephone lines. Telephone lines, of course, it was not compatible with voice. Either you would talk or you would exchange data. And how do we pass, you know, from one mode to the other?
I don't know whether that actually does something or
Next.
Can we get to the next slide? There we go. There's this magic person back there poking a button.
So clever engineers, which were, before I was working on that, invented modems, M-O-D-E-M, modulation, demodulation. And this box you could hook into You could hook the phone set onto it, and then by using the keyboard, then you can talk to a computer. But of course, in order to pass from voice mode to data mode, you had to, I'm sorry, back. No.
There we go.
All right, well, there was a,
I think there's a clever person at the back of the room who's figuring out what you're doing. The buttons don't work.
You know, it's like computers, you know.
It's wetware, not software.
Okay, this one, duck, and then.
We saw that one.
Should it be coming?
Yeah, you can see there. That we it's
no.
on. Yeah.
Oh, this is going from package.
The buttons don't work, Louis.
No. And then what?
Okay.
Next, Louis, you can look over there.
Yeah, here it is. Right. Well, give us the story,
Right.
Louis.
Okay, but then I need the sound. But I need the sound. Hey, Arthur, this is my grandson. He prepared the slides, you know. So we are geeks in from father to grandson in the family. Okay, so you click one, next, and how you get the sound?
There was.
Oh, okay, that's a history.
When my grandfather started to work in the networking field, you had to hook your phone to a special device called modem. It was like the big box.
The two modems.
And it produced a special sound to enable you to connect to distant computers. And that was, sorry.
I bet you anything there are a few teachers in the audience who can remember that sound and that long.
It sounded like a cat having its tail pulled. It would go.
It was a series of strange noise, you know, whistling, going, or whatever. After some time, you were connected, and you had to quickly push a button to go to the data mode, you know. All right. So after that, of course,
See what I mean? How did I do? I have. That wasn't Louis. I have a new career as a modem.
Yeah, that was not the internet. You know, that was the beginning of networking. We didn't have a network yet, but then we had the next step, of course, with having the.
There we are.
Then we started to think that we could have intermediate computers to which we would connect, and then we would type some number or whatever name to address to get connected to one of the computers available, which we call host at the time. Now we call them servers. And that would make all the computers available to everybody who was connected. And many people could work together on different computers or on the same computers, and then they could exchange files, they could exchange email. That was the beginning of the internet. It was actually called the ARPANET at the time, because it was a first experimental network. And then, of course, thinking about it, I thought, why do we have to send pieces of information one after the other, you know, like a train? I mean, if one is blocked somewhere, you have to wait for the next one. That's wasted time. And we have several channels to go from one place to another. So thinking of that, I said we could do better. We could send all these pieces of information like taxis, you know, send them to the destination. They know their way. They found the way on running, and then when they arrive, they're put together. See if someone says some of them are missing, then you call them back. But most of them would probably arrive normally. So you put together the thing at the destination only. That means you can have a faster transit time, larger bandwidth, more capacity, and then you don't have expensive computers to make all kind of checks on the way. So that became internet. The code name for that is datagram. That means you're sending data like a telegram, except it's data. So that datagram were created in the network I built in France with my colleagues. And then I met Bob Kahn. I already had met Bob Kahn initially, but he didn't remember. But it was not yet. It was not yet the internet time. It was still ARPANET. So after we had a lot of discussion, I finally, I think I convinced them that the idea was workable. But I only convinced him. I did not convince the French PTT, you know, the French telephone.
Yes.
I didn't convince the European PTTs at all, anyway. So they built something else based on a different standard, which was, you know, transmitting things one after the other and making expensive network. If it's not expensive, it's not serious, you know. You have to spend a lot of money. So it was, my idea was totally stupid because it didn't cost much, you know.
And isn't that an important lesson? You know, when you have a good idea, you'll always be surrounded by naysayers telling you, oh, that's a load of nonsense, it'll never work, we won't do it.
Okay.
You know, hold on to really good ideas. And then, Bob, what was the next sort of stage for you? You know, what was your...
Well, by this time, I mean, I was sort of the chief designer of the ARPANET, and it worked essentially as Louis described. I mean, we broke messages up into packets, shipped them, put them together at the destination. Happened that we did it in the network. In the datagram mode, you'd probably put them together outside the network in the machine. But we ended up getting involved in two other nets. One was a ground-based network, which we call packet radio, which was essentially in conceptual form the very idea that formed the basis of what's called CDMA technology. That's what we call it. Some people call it WCDMA, and probably in Europe they call it UMTS. Anyway, it's the way
everybody else calls it mobile telephones.
Yeah, it's wireless.
Okay.
That's how they work. It's the same kind of idea with spread spectrum. So we built that net. We built a separate network on Intelsat 4 to link us in the US with researchers all across Europe, because it was getting hard to do it with wire connections all over the place. And so we had a really vibrant potential environment with three different networks. And then the question was, how do we make them work together? They're all different. That was the motivation, really, for the start of the internet. And I was working on this from an architectural point of view. At this time, I had moved from doing the work on the ARPANET and from being a professor at MIT to being part of the U.S. Defense Department, which was funding this research, and then later came and joined me there. But he and I started a collaboration, which was to figure out how to make this all work in a way that was not only workable as a kind of an engineering achievement in the large, but making it work with all of the different types of computers that existed. That's where Vint had, that was the special expertise he brought that I did not have, and I brought a lot of communications expertise that he didn't, and together these ideas became better. We would sit down and have these marvelous sessions about, well, you know, if you do this, it makes it really hard to do that, and if you just change this part over here, it makes this a lot easier. Between the two of us, we actually improved this and came up with a good workable design for the first implementation, which involved those three networks. And we deployed it for the first time, I would say, sometime around 1974 in test mode when the protocols were first developed. And then when we got the connections to Europe, I think the first one was to England, actually, in 1975 through a ground station in Goonhilly that we outfitted for packet switching. And Vint and I just have had this wonderful collaboration for the last 43 years, not always together, sometimes in different places, but effective. And not only did we do the technical part, but I think the most fundamental thing that we did that's not really understood very well by everyone else is we created and made happen in various forms. We played slightly different roles along the way. The social structures that were necessary for people to evolve and extend the technology, because it really in some ways is identical today as it was 40 years ago, but if you look in detail, almost all of it is different in some ways. The computers are different, the applications are different, and it's really this wonderful petri dish for experimentation where people can try different things, see what they work, and I'm sure that the ideas of the future is going to come from people in this room who are going to say, here's a great idea that I have, and here's an opportunity to try it out, and oh, by the way, we don't have to have a small set of people figure out whether it's okay to do it. We can just jump in like society, do our own thing, get our own ideas to work. That's really
That's really the future for everyone here, and I think it's great we were able to be part of it.
And Vint, you've brought along a couple of things that symbolise just how far we've come. You've got two
Well,
props.
I wonder if I would be permitted to respond to the earlier question. You asked what roles do people play, and if there is time to do that, I want to just make a couple of observations. The first one is that the kind of collaboration that Bob mentions was also part of the collaborative work that Louis did on the C-Cloud and Segal systems. All of these were created in an environment where people were able to share their ideas and to actually contribute together. I can't think of anything more powerful than small groups of people who respect each other's opinions, and when they disagree, it's not personal. The disagreements have to do with trying to find the best solution to things. The internet and its predecessors, the ARPANET and SIGLAD and SICAL, were all part of this very collaborative atmosphere. So that's the first point. Second one is my role in the two different systems, ARPANET and internet, tended to sit on top of what these guys were doing. So I was worried not so much about how the inside of the network functioned, how did packets get routed around, but I was worried about what happens when they ended up at the computer at the end. So this system was built in layers, like a layer cake. And the layer that I tended to work in was called the host-to-host or computer-to-computer layer, and applications above that. So in both the ARPANET process and in the internet process, that was my primary focus. Now, I did bring along a couple of things. You can see I'm wearing something. This is called Google Glass. And it is essentially like having a mobile strapped to your head, although I have to tell you, this is a lot more comfortable than connecting that thing to your forehead. So it is a device which has 16 gigabytes of memory. It can record video, it can take pictures, it accepts voice commands. So for example, okay, Glass, take a picture. I've just taken a picture of the two of you. One more thing. Okay, Glass, record a video. I am now recording. This is the entire auditorium. All being waved. There we go. Gotcha. So I am seeing the video as it's being recorded. After this is all over with, they will be uploaded into my Google Drive website.
Can you put it up on the screen now?
I wish I could, but I don't have the...
You have to ask permission.
Guy. Actually, this is a very important kind of thing to do. Bob is always pushing the envelope, saying, "Can we do this? Can we do that?" It's good. That's what engineers love, right? Because it's a challenge. You know, can you do that? So I wasn't prepared for that part, but I'll send you the video afterwards.
Isn't it just so exciting, though? I mean, hands up who would like to try the glasses.
Everybody in the room.
We all want to try the glasses, but how much cooler to have been the person who invented the glasses. So just remember, this could be you. It could be you who's developed it. You know, this is what's so thrilling.
This is a project at Google. We have an organization that's fairly large now with 30,000 people, not counting Motorola Mobility, another 20,000. But there's a group called Google X. Google X does Google Glasses. Google X does self-driving cars. Google X just did launching, it's called Project Loon, as in, you know, sounds crazy. They launched balloons in Christchurch, New Zealand, at about 60,000 feet to provide Wi-Fi service to the ground over a fairly long area. These are way up in the stratosphere, and they drift along in that latitude. So eventually they'll get over Africa, and they will come back around. So, I mean, this is the crazy group at Google. The CEO of Google, Larry Page, says he always wants us to push the envelope, just like Bob was trying to do. I did bring one other thing. You know, when Louis and Bob and I were doing our original packet switching, the computers that we used to do that were the size of a refrigerator, and they cost a lot of money, $100,000. Today, you carry along something more powerful by many orders of magnitude than those devices were in your pocket, a mobile phone, a smartphone. This is a little box, which is a sensor system. It picks up the light levels, the humidity levels, and temperature. I have these in every room in my house. Every 5 minutes, they're sampling those 2 parameters, 3 parameters, and then it is sending it to a central receiver down in the basement. But what's interesting is this little box is also a store and forward packet switch. It's running on 2 AA cells, just 3 volt system for a year. And it forms a network automatically. So all these little devices find each other, organize themselves into a network, which sometimes changes its topology depending on radio connectivity in the house, and then sends data store and forward way, in a store and forward way. This is like a mesh network, basically. So this little box is doing what all the things that we did years and years ago with very big, expensive devices, and it's in a little box this size. So one thing you can know is that over the next decade or so, everything that we do is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, just like these glasses. Now you see them sitting on my head. Maybe someday they'll just be an implant, and we'll all become sort of bioelectronics. I know what this looks like. It looks like the Borg, if any of you remember Star Trek. So, you know, you will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
Well, you know, I've got hundreds of questions, but we want to get your questions now. And so I think I'm right in saying that the very first question comes from Maskell School. So we're just going to find you. And we've got Amy. So Amy, what's your question?
I'm representing Maskell School, and we were wondering, was it all a lot of stress and hard work creating the World Wide Web and the Internet?
Was it stressful creating the World Wide Web and the Internet?
No, it was fun. Really, honestly. I mean, I think the hardest part about all of this is not the engineering. I mean, it's interesting and tough. The hard part is convincing everybody else they want to do what you want to do. This is called sales. And so if you want to be an engineer who's successful, you better learn how to convince your colleagues that they want to do what you want to do, so you get lots of people working on the same thing. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, first of all, none of the three of us directly worked on the World Wide Web. So I don't think we would be authoritative sources on how stressful it is. But in terms of the Internet itself, this was a natural outgrowth of just interesting scientific ideas that we were exploring. People have often asked me, you know, could we see the future? And of course, the answer was, it was a little hard to predict all those things, but as I was mentioning before. But the reality is that it was just a lot of fun, and we really have to stick with it for a long time. I'd like to get it back at some point and tell you what I think the Internet is, because I think that's actually a confused topic. Many people have different views on it, but when you think about the Internet, the two parameters that I think you really need to understand is, or actually it's really one. First of all, it's been around for over 40 years now. Think about other technologies that have lasted that long and shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. In fact, there's probably another 2/3 of the world that have yet to adopt it and probably will in the forthcoming time. The other thing is it's gone through a factor of about 1 million in the dimensions in which the technology has addressed. Name any other technology that has had that range of parameter and still continue to work well. I mean, automobiles maybe went from 15 miles an hour to 60 or 100. They didn't go up by a factor of 1 million. Computers, I mean, all the things that you think about in typical technology inventions, this one has exceeded every one of those parameters, and I think that's its most compelling thing. And the reason is it wasn't about the underlying technology developments. The Internet was all about making things work together. It was all about taking the networks and the computers and the devices and the applications and developing the mechanisms by which, whatever they are now or in the future, that they can work together. That's why it's persisted. And that's why I think it will continue to persist for a long time, even as those networks and computers and applications continue to evolve. Some will naturally pass out of usage because they're replaced by other things that are more interesting and better. That's at the core of what the Internet is.
I'm going to go to another question, Louis, because I think this is going to be a great one for you. So let's just go over to the Soti High School. Hello there. Now, someone's got a question for us. Can we have your question?
Hi, everyone. My question is, what encouraged you or motivated you to come with the idea of this at the first place?
Can you remember a moment, Louis, where you thought, I really, really want to do this? What was your motivation? Was there a moment?
Well, the motivation for an engineer is just because we like to do things complicated. It's in your genes, you know. On the other hand, it's also it's not something you can do yourself. You need a team. You need a group of people to work with you. But by yourself, you can make a thesis, perhaps, or you can play violin, or you can invent some astronomical ideas. But if you want to really succeed in something, you have to have a group of people. And working together is much more exciting because you have contradiction. If you hire only people who are very smart and who say, yes, yes, boss, don't hire the yes boss because you never have ideas. You need people who are able to contradict yourself and to have discussions all around and have better ideas by, you know, thinking about it. So that's the interesting part of engineering is that you're not working just by yourself. You have working with groups of people.
Louis, does that mean that a successful engineer has to be disagreeable?
I don't think it has to be disagreeable. It has to be hard to convince.
Yeah. You have to convince the other guy that you're right.
The other guy, you have to convince you have to convince the people who finance your project also. Most of them don't really understand what you're doing, so you have to make it much simpler than it is, and much easier to implement, and not as expensive as it will be. You know, and so that's the way to agree about the project. You know. And I guess that's part of engineering. You know, you're not. Some people think an engineer is someone with a helmet, with boots, gloves, working in grease and mud, perhaps. Well, I'm one of those. You know, and as you heard already, you know, in 40 years things have completely changed. So for you boys and girls who are going to look for jobs very quickly, very very soon, engineering is no problem because it's changing constantly, and once you get into some area, it will never be obsolete because 5 years afterwards, everything you knew is obsolete. So you constantly have to learn more things, and therefore you're always up to date. You know? Otherwise, you wouldn't be an engineer.
Yeah, and that's exciting, isn't it? Just to be constantly learning. I'm going to go to East Barnet School now. So is it Kathleen? Hi, Kathleen.
Hi. Are you happy with the internet and how it turned out?
Oh, now that's a big question.
No.
I know you're not. You know, look, on the whole, I think that the internet has mostly produced really productive outcomes, especially with the advent of Tim Berners-Lee's World Wide Web and the browsers that Mark Andreessen did. It opened up access to the network, and it made it easy for people to put information into the net, to share it. It made it easy for people to find each other and discover common interests. So I think that on the whole, it's been a very, very positive influence. But you know, once the internet becomes part of a global community, you also find people on it who are not friendly to everyone else's interests. So there's abuse and bad stuff that happens on the net, like any other infrastructure. And that's the period that we're in right now, is trying to find a way to balance the openness and freedom of expression that the internet offers with some ability to resist some of the abuse that can take place in this same medium. And we will have to work our way through that over the next several years in this decade.
To which I would add that there has probably never been a technology in history that didn't have its pluses and its minuses. You know, when fire was first discovered, I hesitate to say invented, you know, people instantly realized it could serve multiple purposes. You could cook food with it, you could heat your abode.
Your cave.
Heat your cave.
Right.
But on the other hand, it could also burn things down, and it could harm you, and it would hurt. You know, automobiles, a lot of positives for automobiles, and yet we're all dealing with the negatives of it as well, whether they be accidents or pollution, things like that. And so for every technology, you have to look at the pluses and the minuses, because there will be them. And in the case of, I mean, to me, as long as the pluses seriously outweigh the negatives, it's just a matter of coping with the negatives. Once you get a situation where the negatives overwhelm the positives, that's pretty easy to deal with too. You kind of restrict it, seclude it, whatever. It's when they're about balance that it becomes really more challenging. I don't know where we are in the internet today, because my guess is that it's probably that the positives really outweigh the negatives, but a lot of people are very concerned about the negatives as well. And so there's a lot of effort going into dealing with those negatives in various policy forums, governmental forums, and a lot of collaboration among different parties, companies, nations in trying to deal with those set of issues. I think they'll be with us for a while, but what my message is that whatever technology you folks get into in the future, you're going to have similar kind of things show up, and it's just the nature of being in this field.
Louis, you said no. I mean, when you reflect on what you have created and you see some of the negative aspects, was there anything that you did that you could have done differently that would have been helpful in that respect? Do you ever reflect on, could there have been something in the way that you structured things that would have made a difference, or is what has happened inevitable?
Yeah, at the time we started building the internet, there are a lot of things on which we have no idea what to do. For example, security, identification, and also how to protect the network from pirates or whatever. You know. But that we thought we'll think of that later. Well, later is today.
Yeah,
still
later,
too late,
right.
you know. So that's what, if we had to build the internet again, we would do differently, for sure. But we couldn't do any better at the time because so many things we had no idea about.
Or the technology may not have been mature to resolve some of the problems of attacking the network or providing confidentiality and things like that.
That's not just the thing that I think unpleasant at the moment. Is at the time, as Bob mentioned, we were all sharing all ideas, exchanging documents, paper, having discussions. There were absolutely no idea, no pretense of taking patents or things like that. But now as soon as you do something, you have to look at the 100 patents that already exist, and you have to protect yourself with a lot of lawyers, which are very expensive. You could be attacked by competitors. And so there is no, very little sharing of ideas at the moment. As soon as internet is taken over by large companies, they are becoming extremely protective and dangerous because they sue each other. And if there is a new company that's trying to do with becoming a competitor, they behave like monopolies. You know, Facebook, Apple, Google, sorry, Amazon, and so on. You know, they're all big business for sure. Business-wise, they're very successful. But in terms of sharing ideas, you know, it's very protected. So that's a problem now. We have a sort of not fragmented, I would say, but walled gardens, as we call them, places which are very interesting, but close to the other.
So I feel absolutely compelled to respond to this because Google, at least, publishes its software openly and makes it available. Android is an open software system. The Chrome browser is an open system. Chrome OS is an open system. We make that software available and we give away all of our products and services. So we're not a monopoly.
Tell us how Google makes its algorithm for referencing documents. So.
Can I make one comment? When you talk about whether you're happy, I want to get into this battle here, but when you talk about whether you're happy with the way things are, various people have gone out publicly and said, we need a clean slate internet. You've probably heard that. We heard it, in fact, Vint and I were at the same meeting where it came up in a very small group of us, but a very senior group, and the argument that was put forward as to why we needed a clean slate was, number one, there's too much spam. Number two, there's too much in the way of viruses and things like that. And number three, lack of security that Louis was mentioning. To which my answer was, look, if you've got a good answer for dealing with spam, tell us, because we can try it on today's internet, see if it works. A clean slate internet may have exactly the same problem, especially if you get into moving messages. If you're complaining about viruses, most of those viruses show up in the end computers. They're affecting your operating systems or your applications in some way, screwing up your local machine. If anything, the internet's doing too good a job of moving these viruses around. Maybe you need a lousier internet or something. And number three, if it's security, this is actually not a problem that you can check off the box and say, we should have done it. Because ultimately, this is a tension between the needs of the private sector
for security in their normal transactions, whether they're business-to-business dealings or people-to-people, and the needs of governments for both law enforcement and national security. And those are not debates that are easily solved by a new clean slate internet. You have the same set of private sector and governmental concerns that weren't easily solved 40 years ago, and I suspect would not easily be solved today.
Okay, well, we've got a room of very bright young people, so there's task number one for you. I'm going to go to Mulberry Girls School now, because we have got Nabila with a very interesting question. And what I'm going to do, because I really want to get through as many of your questions as I can, I'm going to ask for some really short answers. Okay.
Hi, I'm Nabila. I'm from Mulberry School for Girls, and what we wanted to ask you was, how has the internet changed your life?
Ooh.
Well, I have a short answer to that.
Okay.
We got to meet Queen Elizabeth yesterday.
No, excellent. That's how how's it changed your life?
Well, it certainly made me much more aware of the global set of concerns that people have, and it's also brought me in contact with an awful lot of very interesting people from around the world.
How has the internet changed your life, Louis?
We're still changing it, because I've never met Queen Elizabeth yet, until yesterday. So that's because of the internet. Yeah. And on the other hand, it's a lot of work, of course. So you learn, you teach yourself how to sleep, not many hours. Like people who build elevators, they never take the elevators because they are not finished. So they take the stairways. And when we started the networking business, we thought that it was reduced traveling because we could exchange. I never traveled as much as when I was. Well, in other words, it's entirely different from what you expected. And also you meet, a lot of people in this business. We don't meet, of course, we don't need people, many people out of that business. I don't need people in chemistry or in health or whatever, but I have met most people who are famous now in computing. We met them at the time because we were perhaps a maximum of 200 people who were aware of that field when we started. So we've known them all. But now you will be part of that. There will be millions of people now who will be famous, perhaps at least happy to work in networking. We won't know these people now because there is a flood of them. So we'll have to find a souvenir to talk about, like all warriors. And so that's life,
We're going to go to Rohit now. Now, you've got a great question for us. Can you hear me, Rohit?
Let me unmute. I just unmuted. My question to you is, as an 18-year-old high school student, just about to enter university, what field or area of study would you say is most likely to see the most exciting developments in the coming decades?
So this is a great question, isn't it? If you're thinking about the kind of things that you might want to study at university. So what do you think are the most exciting areas? What would you be going into now? If you were 16 and you were thinking, what should I actually study? What would it be?
I would give you a general principle to think about, because one never knows really where the real breakthroughs are going to come from. They're all somewhat serendipitous. There'll be somebody has a real insight one morning. But the thing that was so exciting for me about getting into this networking and computer field, and what really was behind really the relationship that Vint and I have had for all these years was the synergy between the communications field and the computing field. And what we've done is shown over a long period of time that computing can be used in communications, and communications can be used in computing, and in fact the two of them together are much more powerful than either one alone. And so for me that was one essential part of it. And I think if you can find the areas where putting together work in whether it's biotechnology and micromechanical structures, or maybe it's something as simple as nutrition and mechanical engineering. Maybe they go together somewhere. Different areas that you can see in your own mind's eye how if they could only be brought together, the world would be a better place because of that synergy than because of each and what it could do individually.
I have a couple of suggestions in response to that. It's a good question, by the way. Thank you. I also wrote down biotech. This is connecting electronics to human beings, turning them into Borgs like me. Actually, I have a good example of that. My wife wears 2 cochlear implants. They are electronics that go inside of her head. They touch the auditory nerve inside the cochlea, and she hears by way of a computer that's interpreting sound and turning it into electronic pulses inside of her head. So that area is clearly ripe for exploration. Software is another great one because you don't have to change the hardware. You just rewrite the software. It's a low cost, low entry, a low barrier to entry kind of activity, and almost everything on the internet, it turns out to be software. Here's another area, 3D printers. This takes Bob's idea of connecting 2 things that you normally don't link together. Printers you think of as printing on pieces of dead tree, but in fact, a 3D printer is taking material and fabricating it into some mechanical thing. In fact, our trophies were made with a 3D printing kind of technology. But the last thing I'd recommend to you is to go into astrophysics, and I'll tell you why. We know less about the universe now than we did 100 years ago. We thought we knew how it worked, right? Newtonian physics. And then we go through Einstein and quantum electrodynamics and quantum chromodynamics and string theory and everything else. Now, all we know is 5% of the universe is like, atoms, material things. 25% is dark matter. We don't know what it is, but we call it that. And the other 70% is dark energy. We don't know what that is either. So if you go into astrophysics, almost anything you do is likely to produce a Nobel Prize.
And let's have a suggestion from you, because I think this is just such a great question.
Some slightly different interesting point in the sense that what is going to make the most trouble in the world in the next 50 years? Probably the internet a little bit, because the internet carries around the world pictures of scripts or text that some government or some religions or some people or some lobbies hate. They hate to have objections to what they're doing. So that's probably a number of reasons for tensions and possibly violent actions among different groups of people around the world through the internet. Now the next step is cyber war. You heard of Stuxnet in Iran, I suppose. That's already war. And when the next step is other countries doing the same, and then we're getting the whole earth fighting each other through internet. That's a risk. But I think there are even more risky things. It's the lack of resources. And I think among resources, one of them is water. And that's probably something we'll have to be put a lot of energy on saving water. Of course, you have the ocean, but it takes energy to get drinkable water from the ocean. So you're in a loop. So how to save energy, how to save water, and probably food too, even though we have a lot of remaining capacity for growing more food. So I think all these things, even though they are not related to computing, they're always related to computing, to digital methods or digital equipments. So no matter what you like to do, you certainly can pick some subject in this gamut of a list, and you will find some. If you find something that talks to you, that's a subject you could take on.
Okay, let's go now to a question from Chelsea Academy, and we're going to whiz through the answers because there are some awesome questions here, and I want to make sure that we cover them. Is it Miriam? Miriam, excellent.
When you invented your technology, did you realize how much it would impact and change the modern world?
So, did you have any sense of...
Yes. I can elaborate. No, honestly, I think, not to try to speak for Bob and Louie, but I think at the time that we were working on this stuff, we recognized that this was extremely powerful technology, that it would allow, you know, arbitrarily large numbers of networks to interconnect with each other, that arbitrarily large numbers and varieties of computers to link together. That was very powerful stuff, but I think all the social consequences of this were less clear.
So I would have a short rejoinder that might relate to people in the audience. I gave a lecture at the National Academy in Washington, D.C., Academy of Engineering, to a group of young people just like yourselves who were the winners or the finalists in, I forget whether it was the Westinghouse Science Search or the Intel Science Search. And this one young lady got up in the group. She was about 15 years old as the spokesperson, and she said, "Dr. Kahn, I have one question I'd like to ask you on behalf of everybody," because they had very limited time to ask the question. And she said, "We want to know how you managed to convince all the governments of the world to let you build the internet." And what I said to her is, "You're not going to like my answer, but at the time we were doing the work on the internet, most people didn't think this was a good idea, nor would it lead to anything. So the bottom line was, they said, you want to go do that, feel free," because they knew, or at least they thought they knew, that if this ever amounted to something, that the governments would step in or the big companies would step in, or maybe it just wasn't going to work at all. So I think they found that very hard to believe, because it's now obviously so important and powerful. But at the time, I mean, other than the few people who were working on it, and Vint and I and Louis included, to be sure, most people just didn't think this was a very useful thing to do.
You know, in all honesty, Bob, we didn't ask either, and they didn't notice, and that helped a lot.
I guess that's the major deficiencies of existing socio-political systems, is that we think we're in democracy. Democracy has different meaning whether in China or in the United States or UK and so on. But usually we don't ask people about things which are too complicated, because we know there will be no answer. And at the moment, it turns out that very often governments take decisions which may be effective 5 or 10 years later. And then we say, well, we shouldn't have done that. You know, we should have asked people, but people have no idea. So I guess part of the problem is education. You have to instill in people's mind all the questions that for which we don't ask them anything, and which they don't ask themselves either. So they have to be more conscious or more aware of the socio-political implications of that. I know it's difficult, but it should be a way of raising education. On the other hand, you know, there are certainly difficulty in countries which are very authoritarian, in which there is only a unique thinking, and that's difficult. So that's making perhaps people more daring, so that they can protest. Protest may take you to jail, but if they don't start by protest, nothing happens. You know?
I'm going to go to 3 more questions for very, very quick answers. Okay, so Thomas from the John Roan School. Great question, quick answers. Quick and honest answers.
What are you going to do with the prize money?
What are you going to do with the prize money?
I don't have it yet.
Well, I have an answer. I'm going to spend it right here in the UK. I have to. My wife and I have just moved here. We're living in Notting Hill. And if you looked at the cost of housing in Notting Hill, so it's not leaving the country. Also, I'm a member of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists, which is the 100th guild in the City of London. And as you know, all of the guilds are charitable organizations, so some of the money will go there.
Well, my wife Patrice is sitting in the audience, and I'm glad she's here, and I'm going to ask her what we should do with it. I'm sure she'll have some pretty good ideas, but I think we'll probably spend some of it on causes that we're interested in, and we'll probably make very good use of it. You have to realize it's a very large sum of money,
but it's being split 5 ways among all the parties. So it's
still a big sum of money.
Still a big sum of money.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel sneakily resentful that it's going to be that there were 5 of you for this prize? I'm just going to move on now to a question which is from, I think it's Margaret, from St Saviour's and St Olaf's. I'm going to skip to, I'm missing out a question deliberately. Have you got Margaret handy? Where is she? Excellent. Okay.
Did you think of any other names for this international success?
So, could you have called it anything else?
I'm sorry, say again?
Did you think of any other name for the internet?
For internet.
Yeah.
Well,
What's another name?
We started out calling it internetworking because that's what we were doing, linking nets together, but that took too long to say. And so when some of the early documents describing how this would work were written in 1974, we said internet instead of interneting or internetworking. And I didn't think of any other names, honestly. It just, because that described what it was doing. It was connecting different nets to each other.
Well, I think, you know, we were thinking of calling it the Kahn Cerf protocols or the Cerf Kahn protocols, but we realized that would be too restrictive and keep out a lot of people who otherwise contributed. So, in fact, it turns out that in the early days of the internet, especially after Vint became president of the Internet Society, we tried to get the name internet trademarked in the United States. And it turned out that it was blocked because there were a set of banks who thought that the internet was a word they would own to mean, do you use the term ATM machine here, where you get your cash? Those little screens you see where you do your banking, they wanted that to be the internet going forward. And so after a long battle, we got an honorable settlement. My wife actually is a lawyer, handled that case. And I think that the name is stuck, and it's a pretty good name.
Okay, we're going to go to the final question for this session. But if you're sitting there thinking, but I've got a question, don't worry, because I think the question I'm skipping out is an awesome one for the end. So Thomas Deacon Academy, and it's Dennis, yeah?
What's your favorite website?
Well, I have a simple answer to that. Google.
So Google, yours?
For me, if I had to pick one, I would say go look at the handle.net website. It's all about identifying information in a long-term, persistent way.
And how about you, Louis?
Well, since you picked your own company, I'll pick mine, you know. Look at OpenRoot.
Excellent. So for the moment, can I have a massive round of applause for the inventors of the internet? Thank you. You could take your seats. That would be lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Now, when most people think about engineers, they tend to think about fairly rigid images, and there are 2 really that most spring to mind. An engineer makes bridges, an engineer fixes washing machines. So I want you to meet someone now who's just going to perhaps open the world of engineering to you, and that's Tim Marshall. Tim, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. It's quite odd following on from our 3 speakers just there. There's usually the warm-up act comes first. I'm coming afterwards, which is a bit strange. So I've got about 10-15 minutes, and I'm just going to try and do one thing. And it starts off a bit sad, and it ends up a bit happy-ish. Okay? So the sad thing is that this idea of engineering and what engineers do, I just thought that everybody knew what engineers did and that they were brilliant. And I was a bit shocked when I went into a local school. So I live in East Anglia, went to a local school, and they asked me to give a talk about engineering, and I didn't know what to talk about. So I said to the head teacher, I said, could you get the children just to draw me a picture of an engineer doing some engineering work? So these were 10, 11-year-old children. Okay, and I thought I'll get some great pictures back, and I'll tell stories and stuff about what they've drawn. And these are the pictures that I got back. They're really good pictures, and here are some of them. And you can see they're very similar. All the ones I got back had common features. Number 1, they were all men. Secondly, nearly all of them had either a hammer or a spanner in their hand. And thirdly, they were fixing broken things. They were fixing a broken car. That one's now working. It says beep, beep, beep. That's good. And this one, I shouldn't say anything about the UK rail network, but they were fixing broken trains. And you thought, well, that's good. Some engineers do fix broken stuff like that. But as we've just heard, engineering is an awful lot more than that. So my job in the next 10 minutes, 1 word per minute, is to tell you what engineers really do. And what's very pleasing is, although we didn't consult before doing this talk and doing this Q&A session, is you'll see a lot of common themes coming out here. So, number one, engineers are inventors. They come up with great ideas. They come up with solutions. So, I now need, may not like this, could I borrow your camera just for 5 seconds? Yep.
He's going to break it, so it's insured.
Oh, it is insured. Oh, good, good. So, now a quick test for you. I would like you to imagine we've got to go up to the top of the Crystal building. We've got to drop this camera off the top. Yeah. But we don't want it to break because the insurance policy may not be valid. So how could we get this camera from the top of the roof down onto the ground without breaking it? Any ideas? Yes. Please. Yes, make it soft and squishy so it doesn't shatter. Maybe one over here, please. Yep. Walk down the stairs with it. See? Creative thinking. Excellent. One over here somewhere. Yes, please. A parachute. Yeah, well, if we had time, we could get all of you to come up with, thank you very much, great ideas for that. And those would be neat ideas. And that's what engineers do. They invent stuff. And inventing is a very simple process that says, I have a problem, I'm going to work very hard at it until I come up with a solution. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But that's only a tiny part of engineering. The other bit is quite important, which is engineers actually do it. So if I asked you to build a squishy foam thing to stop it falling down, walking downstairs with it doesn't need much help. And the parachute one, you'd have to work out how big should the parachute be, how should it unfurl, how would you stop it swinging in the air. So engineers actually have to do it as well. And a nice example of doing I always like is the fact that it's following on from invention, it's that. Okay, so what is that? Anybody know this one? Yep. Perfect. Yes, Leonardo da Vinci's design for a helicopter, but he never did the red arrow bit. He never got on and actually built one. That went to a guy called Igor Sikorsky, who had the wild idea of saying, why don't we take this aeroplane thing, and we're going to take the wings off, and we're going to take the engine and point it straight up and attach the wings to the engine so it spins round on top. Who wants to test that? And they said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Sikorsky, perhaps not. So he tested it himself, wearing all his full safety gear here, including his trilby hat, and he made it work. And that leads us very neatly from the idea of invention to doing, which is what engineers do, to the third word, which is improving things. Ah, very neat. Yes, like it. So the other thing is about improving. So from Mr. Igor Sikorsky's idea, we have now a whole range of absolutely fantastic helicopters. And I hate putting pictures up like this, because I always get emails from people in the audience afterwards saying, I think the helicopter you named there is actually the model C2B, not blah, blah, blah. So we have big one, we have a red and grey one, we have a blue and white one, and we have a yellow one. But improving is something that happens everywhere in engineering, as we've seen from the story of the internet and the World Wide Web. So, quick example for you. Before mobile phones, just imagine, before mobile phones, if you were out and you needed to make a phone call, how would you do that? Yep. Yep. You find a telephone box, exactly. You would go away and you'd find one of these things here. And you'd put in, depending on your age, 1p, 2p, 5p, 10p, 20p, whatever they cost now, don't know. But you have to pay money to make a phone call. And engineers were asked, can you make us a better technology? And they said, of course we can. And they came up with the mobile phone. And here I have a mobile phone, one of the very early ones here. It's the wonderful Nokia Talkman, okay? So you would do this, and you'd have it on the rather attractive shoulder carrying handle here. And then when it rang, you would then do this, and you would answer the telephone, okay? This is not the telephone, this is just the handset. This is the telephone, okay? And amazingly, this is staggering, amazingly, it had no games on it at all. You couldn't text, all it could do was make phone calls. And if you think where we've gone from with that to, Vint, can I just borrow your phone for a second, please? From that to this technology here is absolutely mind-blowing. So the functionality, the performance of this is just staggering. And we've gone all the way from that to this in, what, 20, 25 years. Absolutely extraordinary. Thank you very much. And now we have Borg-like devices that have taken it even further. So the other thing that engineers do, and this is beautifully illustrated by the Queen Elizabeth Prize, is that engineers never work alone. It's all about sharing. It's all about collaboration. It's all about teamwork. Because however bright people are, you're never going to have all the answers yourself. So, random example, walked around our department where I work and took pictures of our students doing engineering work, and look, they're all working in teams. It's all about solving a problem, bringing together different skills. So that fourth word, very important, sharing. The other one is about shaping, because engineers, a lot of engineering is about taking physical matter and doing something different with it. Not all of engineering, but a lot of it is. And this requires certain processes. It requires you to squish things, that's deformation. It requires you to take bits off, that's subtraction. You add bits to it, you do additive stuff, and you create extraordinary, complex, beautiful things that are sometimes, well, there you go, there's an extraordinary, beautiful thing that illustrates, you remember plasticine? That illustrates all of the basic manufacturing processes. So when they made Wallace and Gromit, they are deforming the material in all the ways I've just described. And the very same technologies of squishing, of subtracting, of adding, of rolling, and all these things are used to make slightly more complicated technologies like this. So this is a wide chord fan blade that goes into one of those, that hangs under the wing of one of those, that shoots you off at several hundred miles an hour all around the world. And what's remarkable is that the way in which they shape it, it has to have extraordinary mechanical properties. So here is part of one of those engines. This is from the very hot bit, and you want jet engines to operate at a very, very high temperature because they're more efficient when they're hot. And this operates at such a high temperature, it's above the melting point of the metal. So this should melt. Your jet engine should just dissolve into a big lump of goo. But it doesn't, because they've done some very, very clever engineering. You won't be able to see it, I think, from there, but some of you may be able to. It's hollow, and all the way through it are tiny, tiny little micro channels where they actually blast cold air up through the middle of it. The cold air comes out here and gives it a blanket of cold air, which keeps the temperature down and stops it melting in the middle of your aircraft engine, which is rather clever. So shaping is a big, big part of engineering. What's very exciting, though, is, I can't show you that now, I want to show you this, though. Going back to, I think, Vint, you mentioned this, the idea of the way in which we've been shaping things has been very much in the past about bashing and about subtracting stuff. We're much more moving to a world now of addition, additive manufacturing, making things like, for what do they cost now, $1,600, maybe $2,000, one of these machines, a bit like a big laser printer, and you could print one of those. All those parts there were printed in that machine there. That's quite fun. You can print all the toys you want, but the same technology can be used for, what else can we do? You can print body parts, you can print components of aircraft, you can print implants for the body. A huge range of things can now be done with this technology. So I fully support the idea that 3D printing is an exciting new area for engineers. Having shaped all these bits and pieces, what engineers have to do is join them all up, assemble things into wonderful aircraft like this, the biggest aircraft, passenger aircraft in the world, the A380, or doing extraordinary things like that, building massive towers that literally scrape the sky. And the achievement of doing that is quite extraordinary. Again, that's all engineering. But getting to the slightly more fun words as I get to the last bit of this talk is questions like that. I mean, it's why questions, or even better, perhaps the why not questions. Why is it like that? Why can't we do something differently? And maybe a slightly different example from a super high-tech one is, well, somewhere I have one. So, do any of you remember using one of these? Or maybe even have a small brother or sister who uses one of these? It's absolute genius bit of engineering, driven by someone, this lady here, called Mandy Haberman, who looked at the way in which children drank out of cups, particularly toddlers, and realized that extraordinarily that toddlers don't always have the ability to hold a cup straight up. And you give them a drink and they'll go, oh, that's fun, and it all pours out. She said, well, that's ridiculous. You put a lid on it and tell a toddler, please put the lid on after you finish drinking. It just doesn't work. So she came up with this very simple, very elegant engineering solution that solved that problem dead. So you can fill this up, tip it upside down, and nothing comes out. But when you want to drink, you just suck on it, and the water comes out, or the milk, or the whatever it may be comes out. So very clever, simple technology, driven by someone saying, why is it like that? Why can't we do it better? So, another favorite word of mine, the oops word. I have lots of examples where engineers have made some fairly major, it's a polite way of putting this, we'll just call them mistakes, all right? And I'm just going to give you one, because it's a very important learning experience. So here we have something that was developed by NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It was a probe. It was going to go out, it did, go out into space, But unlike most probes, which go out in one direction, sending signals back and then just continue until the battery runs out or they lose contact with it, this one they wanted back on Earth. That's quite tricky. So, if you remember the camera example, how would we get the camera up from the top of the building here, downstairs, without using the stairs? The same problem they faced here. How do you get this back onto Earth? So here was the mission that they were going for. The details aren't important, but basically it was going off for 3 years and had to come back and land on Earth. And it was a delicate, beautiful piece of technology that must not break. So they followed the instruction, the idea that was from someone at the back there, put a parachute on it. They said, okay, we can do that. It'll come back to Earth, gets to a certain point. Computer says, release parachute, comes down, still going too fast. What else could they do to slow down the parachute as it came down? What else could they do apart from making it bouncy? Yep. Giving it less weight, so bits were removed. There's only a core bit coming down. That's a good way, yep. A turbine under it to push it up. Love it. Yes, up there. Cushion it. Yeah, well, they kind of tried this. And what they worked out was the best solution was to get a helicopter piloted by a Hollywood stunt pilot to catch it in midair. True story. Absolutely brilliant. They practiced this. Stunt pilots can do anything. Absolutely fantastic. So everything was going to plan. They're all waiting there with the telescopes, watching it coming down and going, any minute now, the parachute will open. Any minute now, the parachute will open. Bang! It didn't open. And the reason it didn't open is because, see that pencil there? To scale is that little component there. That was a very important component. It told the probe which way was up and which way was down. Quite. The engineers had put it in upside down. So as it was coming down, the computer was saying, shouldn't we release these parachutes soon? The computer said, no, everything's fine, carry on. Boof, into the Earth. Several $100 million blown away. But the reason I'm putting that up is, this is how engineers learn. That mistake will never be made again. It should not have been possible to put it in upside down. That was a bad design. All new ones, you can only put it in one way out. And I've got loads more examples of bridges falling down and all sorts. The point is, you learn from mistakes. Try and avoid mistakes, but if you make them, if you expand and push the envelope, as was being described before, mistakes will happen. Last couple coming up now, the yes word I love. So I think we all rather enjoyed the Olympics. That was great, that competitive spirit thing, very, very, very important. And we're very pleased how it all went. But this can be used to drive engineers as well. You can set engineers challenges and they can do amazing things. If we set you all a challenge now, I would be staggered by the level of ingenuity you would demonstrate in coming up with solutions, particularly if I said, here's a little prize. In this case, going back to the era of Kennedy in the 1960s, he said, we're going to put a man on the moon. He set a challenge. He said, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to win this race. We're going to put a man on the moon. Rather importantly, he also said, and return him safely to Earth. That's a little more tricky. But they did it. So they built this absolutely staggeringly, some ways very simple, in some ways very, very complicated rocket to blast that spindly little craft up there onto the, out into space to land on the moon so that this man could then take pictures like this, which I think have really changed the way we look at the world and the way we do everything now, and the way we communicate, the way we do things. So it's absolutely monumental achievement, which is still happening now. We still have competitions for engineers to encourage them to do new and exciting things. So there are the 9 core words, okay? We've got the idea of engineers invent stuff, they actually get on and do it, they improve it. By the way, that was the phone I was going to bring down, but it was too heavy for me to carry all the way from Cambridge. Engineers share, they're always working in teams, they manipulate material to make it do something different, they put it all together to make enormous structures and tiny structures and complex structures and simple structures. They're always asking the why question, why is it like that, why can't it be better? They learn from their mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable, and in some ways should be encouraged up to a point. And also, they love a challenge. They like to say, this, I want to win this one, I want to do this, I don't want it not to be done. But the smart ones amongst you will have spotted that's only 9 words. So I reckon if you go back to where we started, with the children and their pictures of engineers, they weren't wrong. They got it right. Engineering is about fixing things. But the thing that probably needs fixing more than anything else in the world, going back to the comments we heard about energy and water and healthcare and all these things, there are a huge number of problems that absolutely, desperately need fixing, and that's my 10th word. So I hope in the last sort of 10, 12 minutes we've given you a very brief flavour of what engineering is to show you it's much, much more than just the inventing and the wearing boots and wandering around with a hammer. And I like to believe that engineers are kind of superheroes that can do anything they want. Any one of you could do remarkable things given the right environment. And if you'd like to know more about this, we have a website with lots of videos and stuff that you might want to look at. But that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so I hope you're still thinking about what it is that you are going to fix, because we're going to ask you at the end. Now, one of the images that came up there was of engineering being used in sport. And when the Olympics were running, you couldn't help but see all sorts of examples, whether it was from the shape of a javelin, whether it was the way that running shoes were made, of where engineering was making a difference to the performance of all of those athletes. So I'd like to welcome an expert up on stage. His name is David James. He's from Sheffield Hallam University, and he's going to talk about the impact that engineers can make in sport. Welcome.
Thank you. And thanks very much. It's absolute delight to be here. And just if you're wondering, that they aren't flames coming out of the back of that badminton shuttlecock. That's actually an airflow simulation. We're trying to understand why feathered shuttlecocks fly so much better than plastic shuttlecocks. It's a classic example of just engineering kind of gets absolutely everywhere, and it certainly gets involved in sport. I'm going to talk just about one sport, just for 10 minutes, a sport that's very close to my heart. I feel very privileged, really, that I get to share my passion for sport with my real passion for engineering, and bringing it together with my favourite sport, cycling, is just one of the best things ever, really. So I'm going to talk really about probably one of the most important things in cycling, which is around aerodynamics. So aerodynamics is really the sort of the study of how objects interact with the air, and how that air creates forces which push that object. It's very important in cycling because bikes can go quite fast. Now, I'm going to show you an equation. Okay, now there is something that does happen in engineering. Engineers do use maths. It's very much sort of the language of how we figure things out. And it might look like a kind of a complicated equation there that we don't understand, and you might feel very scared about it. But I'm going to take you through it very carefully. Essentially, what it says is F, which is the drag force. This is really important. This is the force that's going to slow a cyclist down. That equals the air density, the relative airspeed, something that's called a drag coefficient, and the frontal area of the cyclist. So we can break all these things down, and we can understand what they are. And this is going to tell us how we can make a cyclist go faster, which is something that I've been very fortunate to get involved in working with British Cycling, designing bikes. So let's just have a look at one example of what happened last summer. It's another 17-2 by Philip Hines. Now it's Jason Kelly. Kelly storming around the track here on the second lap, and France are on the back foot. Coming up to the final takeover. It's 0.2 behind. France are never going to pull this back. Here comes Chris Hoy. Hoy coming down to the final turn. Brilliant. Another goals, just another day at the track. Sorry about beating France. It did happen. And it wasn't anything to do with the fact that the wheels were rounder, whatever the French coach said it was. There was actually a very interesting piece of behaviour which all cyclists do here, and it's around drafting. This is the team sprint, where the cyclists go around the track and they suck in behind each other, trying to keep their bikes very close to each other, literally about 10 centimetres from the back wheel, travelling at, 50 kilometres per hour. It's an incredible achievement to go around that track that close to each other. And they're doing it for a very good reason. It's because they can reduce their aerodynamic drag force. Now, athletes throughout the years have been trying to do this in various ways. This is a fantastic example of a cyclist cycling behind a train. They've actually laid wooden tracks in between, sort of a wooden platform in between the tracks there, so that the cyclist could ride the bike very, very fast. And I think this cyclist got up to about 80 kilometers per hour cycling behind that train. It was probably actually limited by just how fast the train was going. This cyclist here really took things to another level when he started to cycle behind a dragster, effectively. You just hear here.
To help him become the fastest self-propelled man on Earth, Howard was initially pulled behind a dragster. Once up to speed, he let go of the car and pedaled in its draft.
We are pulled up to some speed. Usually it's
225.
70, 80
So he's pedaling at 225 kilometers per hour. He's got two cogs there. I can see on the bike. There's two sets of cogs, so he can actually. His legs aren't pedaling so fast. He's getting that big mechanical advantage there. And the way he can do that is because he's reducing the aerodynamic forces by this mechanism of drafting, the same thing that happens on the velodrome. And it actually happens in lots of different events as well. This is actually one of my friends, Nicole Cook, who's a fantastic female cyclist. And you can see here in the sprints at the final stages and road races, cyclists suck in behind each other, and then they will accelerate at the last moment just to get that advantage. We see it in triathlon. You know, water and air, they are different, but they're both fluids. They both behave in a similar way. And in triathlon and open water swimming, swimmers will suck in behind each other and literally tickle each other's toes to be pulled along through the water. And it happens in nature as well. You know, birds will fly behind each other, so they share the workload. So how does it happen? Well, this is why actually sometimes doing a bit of maths can really help, because this equation tells us why this works. So if you're the first cyclist in the pack, you're experiencing a very large force. If you're the second, you've got a slightly smaller force. If you're third, it's slightly smaller again. And it's because two terms in the equation are changing. The air density is changing, and the air speed is changing. And that's for a very good reason. So I'll get myself in the right direction. So you're cycling along. What you're actually doing is you're compressing the air in front of you. That air is becoming more dense. Then as you move forwards, you leave a gap behind you, and that air becomes less dense. We get a pressure difference on either side. So what it means is that row, that funny letter there, that is smaller for the second cyclist than it is for the first cyclist. So their drag force is smaller. Equally, the airspeed is different as well, because what happens is as you move through the air kind of circulates behind you and it actually gets sucked in backwards, so the airspeed drops as well. So these two things drop, so the drag force drops, which means you experience, you've got lower aerodynamic drag, which means you can go for the same speed without putting in less energy. So that's one of the first rules of aerodynamics. Okay, let's look at something else.
Early racers had to deal with height as well as speed. And like all athletes, cyclists had to be completely dedicated.
I'm a non-smoker and teetotaler. I go to
There's no monkey business, apparently. I don't know what that means. There's something very interesting. There's a number of problems here with racing penny farthings, which were raced on velodromes. First of all, you haven't got any gears, which means if you've got a long leg, you can have a bigger wheel, which means you can go faster. But there's a bigger problem, which is actually around what we call the frontal area of the cyclist. This was another term in our drag equation. And if you're riding a penny farthing, you're standing upright. You've got a very large frontal area. The frontal area is, if you were to take a picture of someone, it's literally how much space they occupy on the page. Now, this cyclist here really understood this. This is a cyclist called Graham O'Brien from Scotland. And you can see there, he's got his body in a position where he's reduced his frontal area to the minimum amount possible. He's kind of gone over in this extreme crouch position. And he did very well here. He actually he broke a number of world records. One of the most coveted records in cycling is the hour record. Literally, how far can you go in 1 hour? Although later, what actually happened, this often happens in my industry, is that you kind of come up with what you think is a fantastic innovation, and then the regulator comes in and says, no, you're not allowed to do that. That's broken the rules. We're going to create a new rule, which means you can't do it. So you have to be inventive. You have to sort of be flexible and come back. So Graham O'Brien did this. He actually came back a year later. He changed the position. He created a new position, which he called the Superman position. A similar idea. It was all about reducing his frontal area. He actually managed to go faster with this new position and broke even more world records. But again, the governing body came back and they banned this position, and he wasn't allowed to do it again, at which point I think he gave up. I suppose what we've ended up there now is we've ended up in a sort of a state of regulation where athletes, they can do something kind of halfway between these two positions, and that seemed to be okay. So the frontal area is a really important thing, again, and getting your body in the right position on the bike is really important for reducing those aerodynamics. The final thing, sort of piece of this equation, is actually around the shape of components of the bike, and this is something really where some really interesting engineering comes in. This is where we start to use sort of simulation computers to try to predict how air particles will move over different shapes. And what we do is we can actually change the shapes of objects and model how the air moves around them to try and figure out what is the optimal shape for a component to be. So this is work we're doing, designing, say, the handlebars of the bikes, looking at how what is the optimum sort of design of the wheel, where is the pressure distribution on the wheel, even looking at things like you know, the design of a wheel nut and how air moves around a wheel nut. Now, these are quite small changes. Changing the design of a wheel nut or the profile of a wheel will only have a very small impact on the speed a cyclist goes. But if you can make enough small changes on every aspect of the design, you might start getting tangible benefits where you might be able to start moving, say, a cyclist up from, say, bronze position into gold, or even allowing a gold medalist to get a new world record. So we're kind of putting it all together, back to our sort of equation. What we've looked at drafting, okay? We've looked at basically trying to reduce what we call the sort of the relative airspeed and the air density, looking at design optimization, that's that CD, that's that drag coefficient, that's all about the shape, and then finally reducing the frontal area. So that's really just a tiny snapshot, one little story of how engineering affects just one sport. And I think you know, we can all think of, there's so many different sports out there. Often I say, well, I'm a sports engineer, and people say, well, what on earth do you do? And I'm thinking, well, of course, engineering is absolutely everywhere. Engineering is in every part of your life, whether it's, you know, mobile, telecommunications, you know, the internet, the clothes you're wearing, fashion, design, you know, and literally this camera, it's absolutely everywhere. And, you know, I feel very lucky to work in engineering, because engineering's taken me to a lot of places. I'm only, you know, relatively kind of, you know, halfway through my career or so, and you know, it's taken me to some extraordinary places. You know, here being one of them, and meeting, you know, the inventors of the internet being another one. So I'd urge you, you know, if you are interested in engineering, it's got a wealth of opportunity. So I hope you'll choose it. Okay, thanks very much.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm just going to ask our inventors of the internet to come and sit here once again. I mentioned there was a question that I missed out, and I really want it. It comes from Pimlico, and I've not got a name for you, but do you know who you are? It's you. Excellent. Right. Let's have your question, because it leads into what I want to get from the audience in a second.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Nathaniel, and I would like to say, when you look back over your accomplishments, what do you feel, and what do your children feel as well?
I didn't hear the question.
How do you feel about what you've accomplished?
You know, I think that the one thing that is most satisfying about any engineering task is that someone else actually uses what you do. And so I think that's true of any product or anything else. So the fact that so many people are not only using the internet, but helping to evolve it still today is extremely satisfying, pretty exciting, and absolutely amazing.
To which I would add, I certainly agree with everything that Vint said, but that the potential of what we did is so long-lasting that for your whole careers, I think you could be able to leverage it and take advantage of it
most inventions have more finite lifetimes. Not all, and they're usually very limited, like a bottle opener that can open a bottle. That's probably got long legs, as they say. And we will probably have bottles around for a long time. But it's limited to that one function. There is almost no limit to the kind of problems that you can address with the internet. And to me, that's the most satisfying.
Louis?
Okay, well, the first step is that first it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Second step, people are using it, indeed, as you said. I think the third step is someone is improving it. And there is more and more diversification, or diverse version of what you've done. So that's probably the real satisfaction.
So now, do you remember at the beginning, I asked you to think about what you would like to do, what things you felt in life really needed to be improved. So you've had about an hour and a half now to think. So has anyone had some ideas? And they can be as wild as you wish, because I can promise you that when these gentlemen first started to think about the internet, everybody thought they were nuts. You've heard that. So don't worry about if you say an idea and people laugh, because guess what? That's probably the idea that's really going to take off. So who's had some thoughts? Who'd like, yeah, okay, there's a chap here. Can we have a microphone just down here? That's lovely. Let me know who you are and what school you go to.
My name's Ahmed and I go to Chelsea Academy. I think that you should make a teleporter so we can just travel to places in 1 second. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what you'd like to do. So that's a great thought. Do we have any more? There's a girl up at the back. I'm keeping you really busy now. This is where they earn their money. Tell me what you want to change, and then if you just put it, and while you're just getting the mic, just put your hand up if you've got an idea, so that we know where the next one's going to be. Okay, so that's it. Okay, yeah. Quickly, what are you going to?
Hi, I'm Biba from Marylebone School for Girls. My idea is make an earring that's actually a headphone speaker. So you can have
an earring
an earring that's a speaker, a music speaker.
Excellent. An earring that is a music speaker. Okay, what are you going to do?
Thomas Deacon Academy, and I might try and get to light speed. Might try and get a vehicle to get that fast.
Excellent. That's your promise. And we've got an idea down here. An idea there, just behind you in green. That's it.
Repeat that last one. I don't think I heard that.
Okay.
Vehicle that what? I didn't hear.
I think was it like the speed of light? Yeah, light speed. Yeah. Get that. Yeah. Okay. Next.
I'm Clemency from the Marylebone School. And I would create some way of being able to imagine what flavours would go well together rather than actually experiencing them. So you could just imagine having an amazing meal in your head and be able to taste it.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, that's an interesting idea. Yep. What are you going to do?
My name's Nafisa. I'm from Marylebone School, and I would make Bluetooth accessible to everybody in the world, but in doing that, make the most advanced security system, which would mean that you can connect to somebody in Africa, but if you don't want to connect to somebody in, say, Japan, you didn't have to.
Okay, that's your idea. Well done. And then we'll take this idea here.
I'm Anna from Chelsea Academy, and I think we should get rid of all the chaos when you go to the airport, when you have to go through all the security and all of those BP machines. I think you could all do that on a computer before you go to the airport, and it'll just get rid of all the time and everything.
It's such a palaver, isn't it? All the business with your shoes. Okay. Yep.
I'm Alexia from St. Saviour's and St. Olave's. I think there should be a way to look back in time, before they had cameras and videos, to teach people what's going to what happened before, because it's pretty hard to try and explain something to children that you don't even know yourself.
Wouldn't that be fascinating if you could meet a child, I don't know, in the 16th century and talk to them? Yes, just behind. Yep, take that one.
I'm Naraya from St. Saviour's as well. I'd probably find a way that's easier to transport food or money to other countries, because sometimes it may be hard because some foods go off quite easily, and many countries might get food that's not even used properly, and make sure it gets to the person that's needed to.
Brilliant, that's a fantastic idea. Yep.
With all the overcrowding issues we've got on our planet at the moment, there are just too many humans for us to fit.
just getting a colony on Mars and how we'd actually get the air there for people to breathe.
Excellent. So that's quite a big task you've got. How long are you setting on that task? Because you've got to do these things. This is not what other people are. This is you. Okay, how long? Do you want 10 years, 20 years? How long do you want? Okay, well, there are some, what I really want you to understand is you are responsible for doing these things. You're not going to wait for other people to do these things. You are making a promise today to do those things. You've heard a few ideas. Just very quickly, what do you want these young people to do? In a sentence, we have one thing that you, the inventors of the internet, want our young people, and I hope we can get our young people in India and Africa just up on screen as well, because we're tasking them with the same thing. What do you want them to do? You're handing over the baton now.
Well, I have a very long list. We don't have time to go into it. So let me just pick one far-fetched example. For those of you who study astronomy, we have these telescopes in outer space that are able to look back in history and find out what the universe looked like a fraction of a second after the so-called Big Bang. Well, if we can look into outer space and see that, why couldn't we put a telescope in outer space and look at the history of our planet and our society and find out what happened here 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago in some kind of detail?
It sounds like you could collaborate with someone up there. Okay.
I just picked one. Yes,
okay.
No doubt.
There's one problem with that. You have to get the telescope to keep going farther and farther and farther away, faster than the speed of light. Otherwise, it's going to be contemporary information.
Well, so there's all these preliminary problems.
Just a matter of software. I would like you to do two things. Well, first of all, help solve the global warming problem before we all fry. And second, make sure that we all have fresh water to drink because we're running out.
Okay, thank you. And Louis.
And wine.
And wine. Yes, that's right. Good. Yes.
Yeah, but I would say, whatever you do, I think you should be, you should not be afraid of getting involved in the social or political or both implications of what you are doing. And of course, that may require that you spend some time for that. And we know every engineers are always extremely busy, so you have to spare some time to be aware of what's happening in the society around you. And I think try to eliminate the barriers to understanding. That means education, how to explain to people what you do, or what you think they should be doing, and also trying to get over the language barrier. That's a major problem in the real society, in the real humanity, is we have 6,000 languages spoken today. I don't mean there are too many, but I think the way the things are changing at the moment is it eliminates a number of languages, probably the ones that don't have that many speakers. That means it erases part of the thinking, part of the mentality, part of the concept that people have in any language, that it may disappear when the language disappears. So trying to facilitate, even though you may learn English, German, whatever, French, you may learn major languages, but keep going, keep maintaining the local and the traditional languages, which are part of the culture.
So there are some challenges which have been thrown out to the room. Hold those ideas that you've got very dear. Remember, you can do those things. And a number of you have made certain commitments, some of which seem really quite massive. But I hope to be back here in maybe, let's say 10, 15 years' time, listening to you telling me how you did it. We've had a marvellous hour and a half. Will you put your hands together to this, for everyone for contributing to this experience. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.